You get $15, Dad. That was my son's final offer, his voice dripping with the satisfaction of a man about to inherit his mother's $160 million fortune. He wanted me front and center at the will reading, just to witness his victory, to see my face when my complete and utter worthlessness was read into the legal record. What he didn't know was that my ex-wife, even in death, had one last move to play, and I was the centerpiece of it. Before I tell you how it all unfolded, let me know in the comments where you're listening to this story from. And be sure to like and subscribe if you believe that sometimes the quietest people have the most devastating plans. The building for Caldwell and Finch was exactly what you'd expect, a monument to power. It didn't just sit on the street, it owned it. A wall of dark glass and polished granite rose in front of me, cold and imposing. I pushed through the revolving doors, and immediately, the noise of the city vanished. It was replaced by a deep, almost reverent silence. The lobby felt like a cathedral, but one built to worship money. The floors were vast expanses of white marble, so perfectly polished I could see the faint reflection of the ceiling lights, high above. The walls were paneled in dark, glossy mahogany, their scent tinged with lemon oil and the musty aroma of old wealth. I'd spent my entire life designing buildings, but I had never created a space like this. This wasn't designed for people, it was designed to overpower them, to make everyone who walked through its doors feel small. And I felt it. Small. I was wearing my only suit, the charcoal gray one. The fabric was good wool, the kind that was harder to come by these days. But it was 20 years old. The cut was too generous, the shoulders too padded. It was clean. I had pressed it myself back in Austin, until the crease on the pants was sharp enough to cut through steel. But it was old. It was the same suit I had worn to the divorce hearing. The last time I saw Isabella face to face. The last time I saw her look at me with anything other than cold disappointment. Disappointment fueled by the lies my son had whispered into her ear. I could still smell the faint trace of mothballs on it, a scent of preservation, of things that had been kept but were no longer useful. As I walked toward the reception desk, the sound of my old leather-soled shoes clicking against the marble floor seemed impossibly loud. The sound echoed, too sharp in the silence, making me feel even more out of place. A few young lawyers, men and women in their 30s, dressed in suits that probably cost more than my truck, glanced up from their phones. Their eyes didn't linger. They scanned, assessed, and dismissed me in a single motion. I wasn't a client. I wasn't a threat. I was just old. An anomaly. I felt like a stain on a pristine white canvas, like ink spilled across a legal document. I didn't belong. And I knew that was the point. This was Nathan's first move, summoning me to his territory, to this fortress of power, while I was wearing the armor of my greatest defeat. I reached the reception desk, a slab of marble that looked as if it had been carved from a mountain. The woman behind the desk was young, blonde, and wore a sleek headset that seemed almost part of her. "Can I help you?" Her voice was bright, but her eyes were tired and distant. "I'm here for a 10 o'clock meeting," I said, my voice rough, like wood that hadn't been sanded. "The reading of Isabella Thorne's will. My name is Julian Thorne." Her eyes flickered for a second. The name Thorne clicked, but the face didn't match what she was expecting. She was probably anticipating someone more like Nathan, someone who belonged here. Not me. For just a moment, a flash of confusion crossed her face, then it quickly morphed into something colder, something distant. The professional mask snapped back into place. "Of course," she said, though the smile never quite reached her eyes. "Mr. Harrison is expecting you. Please take a seat. They'll be with you shortly." She gestured toward the waiting area, a collection of low, black leather sofas arranged around a glass table that looked far too shiny to be real. I sat at the edge of one. The leather was stiff, cold. I clasped my hands together, my rough, calloused carpenter's hands resting against the fabric of my old suit. I looked around at the art on the walls. Expensive, abstract. It didn't speak to me. It was just color and shape, meant to fill space. I was a ghost here, a relic of a past they had all agreed to forget. And as I sat there, waiting to be told that I was officially worth nothing, just as my son had promised, the anger from that phone call, that smoldering coal deep inside, burned a little brighter. I wasn't here to be humiliated. I was here to finish this. Then, they didn't just walk in, they made an entrance. Nathan strode in, and he wasn't alone. He moved with a confidence he had no right to possess, the swagger of a man who's never heard the word no. He wore a navy blue Tom Ford suit, likely more expensive than my salary for 6 months. It fit him perfectly, highlighting a physique sculpted by personal trainers, not by years of hard labor. His hair was slicked back, and his watch, gold and steel, glinted at his wrist. His face held an expression of boredom, like the world owed him something. Trailing behind him were his accessories. The first was a young woman, impossibly thin, shockingly beautiful, but in that harsh, artificial way. She was squeezed into a designer dress and clutched a Hermes purse like it was the only thing that could save her. Her name, I would learn, was Sophia. She was engrossed in her phone, her thumb swiping mindlessly across the screen. The second was a man in his 40s with a tan that looked too perfect for an October in New York and teeth too white to be natural. He wore the smile of a predator, that tight, fixed grin. This had to be Kyle, the financial advisor. They weren't a family mourning a loss. They were a pack of vultures circling what they thought was their kill. Nathan strolled to the reception desk without even sparing me a glance. "Nathan Thorne," he announced, his voice echoing in the large space. "Harrison is expecting me." The receptionist, who had barely acknowledged me, was suddenly all smiles, all efficiency. "Yes, Mr. Thorne. Right away, Mr. Thorne. Please have a seat." He turned to sit, but then his eyes finally found me. He stopped, mid-step. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a cat who had just cornered a mouse. Nathan walked over, his expensive shoes silent on the marble floor. His 2 companions followed, curiosity piqued. "My God," he said, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "You actually came?" He looked me up and down, his gaze lingering on my old suit and the worn collar of my shirt. "I guess you really do need that $15, he added, his voice dripping with mockery. Kyle, the financial advisor, flashed a grin that could have cut through steel. He didn't look at me like a person. He assessed me like a piece of outdated furniture, something that needed to be cleared out and thrown away. Nathan gestured vaguely in my direction, as if trying to introduce me to his followers. "This," he said, pausing just enough to make the insult sting, "is my father." He said the word father like it was a dirty secret, an unfortunate biological fact he had no choice but to acknowledge. It was an apology, a way of saying, "I'm sorry this man exists in my life. Sorry for my shabby suit. Sorry for my worn-out shoes. Sorry for my failure to be someone who reflected his imagined glory." Suddenly, I remembered him at 10 years old. It was Christmas morning, and I had spent weeks in my workshop, back when I still had one, crafting a detailed model of a battleship. I had been so proud of it. Nathan opened the box, glanced at it for a second, and tossed it aside. "It's not a brand name," he whined. "I want what my friends have." Isabella, always quick to solve problems with money, had swooped in with an expensive video game console. She had built this monster, one spoiled whim at a time. This man standing before me wasn't a man. He was just a collection of appetites, wrapped in a $10,000 suit. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him. I met his smug, arrogant gaze and held it. I didn't flinch. I didn't defend myself. My silence seemed to unnerve him more than any angry retort could have. He was expecting a reaction, begging for it. He wanted me to plead, to get angry, to show him how much power he had over me. But I gave him nothing. I just sat there, a ghost in my gray suit, watching the show he so desperately wanted to produce. His smile tightened. He wasn't enjoying this as much as he'd hoped. He turned away from me and spoke to Kyle. "So, the first thing we do is liquidate the real estate portfolio in." But before he could finish, the sound of a heavy oak door opening cut him off. A man stepped into the doorway, and in that instant, the entire atmosphere of the room shifted. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The show was about to begin. My son stood there, basking in the glow of his own arrogance, and my mind drifted back. Christmas morning, he was 10. The whole house smelled of pine needles and cinnamon, the warmth of the season filling the air. I had spent weeks in my workshop, back when I still had one, crafting a model battleship for him by hand. It was a perfect replica of the USS Missouri. I'd carved the tiny cannons, coiled the miniature ropes, and painstakingly hand-painted the flag on the stern. I was so proud of it. I thought he would love it. He opened the box, looked at it for maybe 3 seconds, and then tossed it aside onto the floor. "It's not a brand name," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I want what my friends have." Isabella, my wife, didn't correct him. She didn't explain the value of a gift made with love. Instead, she swooped in with a brightly wrapped box containing the latest, most expensive video game console. She wasn't being kind. She was being easy. She had built this monster piece by piece, buying his affection because earning it was too much effort. And even then, I think she knew it. The memory was so clear it almost had a taste. Bitter, sad. Before I could hold on to it any longer, the sound of a heavy oak door swinging open broke the moment. A man in his 60s stood in the doorway. Tall, wearing an impeccable gray suit, he radiated quiet authority, not the flashy wealth that seemed to define the rest of the room. This was Mr. Harrison. He had the face of a judge, impassive, unreadable. His eyes didn't just look at you. They assessed, weighed, and filed you away. The quiet confidence he exuded instantly quieted the room. Even Nathan seemed to shrink a little under his gaze. Mr. Harrison's eyes passed over Nathan and his entourage, like they were just part of the furniture. And then they landed on me. He held my gaze for a moment, and I saw something flicker in his expression. It wasn't pity. It was closer to understanding. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice level and respectful. "Thank you for coming." He didn't offer his hand, but the words themselves were a handshake. A simple acknowledgement of my presence, of my right to be here. Then, and only then, did he turn to Nathan. "Mr. Thorne," he said. The same name, but the tone was different, colder, stripped of any warmth. It was a subtle slight, so small a lesser man might have missed it. But Nathan's entire world was built on the fragile scaffolding of status and special treatment. The fact that I, the outcast, had been acknowledged first, was a direct challenge to his authority. I saw a flicker of annoyance in his eyes, a tightening of his jaw. He tried to cover it with a wave of dismissive arrogance. "Let's get this over with, Harrison," he snapped, his voice sharp with impatience. "I have a reservation at Pay to celebrate. I don't intend to be late." Mr. Harrison's expression didn't change. He simply nodded once, acknowledging the tension in the room. "As you wish," he said, his tone calm and steady, before turning to hold the door to the conference room open. "This way, gentlemen." The conference room was as cold and imposing as the lobby, but with an added layer of finality. A single massive table made of dark polished mahogany dominated the center of the room. It was so reflective it almost seemed like a dark pool of water, mirroring the artificial light above. Floor-to-ceiling windows lined one wall, but instead of offering a view of the sky, they gave a close-up, sterile look at the gray skyscraper across the street. This room wasn't meant for comfort. It was built for executing contracts, for asserting dominance. Nathan naturally took the seat at the opposite end of the table from the door, the seat that marked him as the new head of the family. He leaned back, spreading his arms wide, staking his claim in the space like a king on his throne. Sophia and Kyle sat on either side of him, like a queen and bishop, protecting their king. I took a seat near the door, far from their little fortress. I was just there to fill the chair, a legal formality. I placed my calloused hands on the table, their roughness a stark contrast to the flawless, unblemished wood. "Very well," Harrison said, his voice returning to its neutral, businesslike monotone. "Let us continue." "Fifth," he read. "As I was saying, I leave my first edition copy of The Wasteland to—" He paused, and I could have sworn I saw the faintest hint of a smile tug at the corner of his mouth. "Ah, no. That's been struck. Let's move on." "Sixth, regarding the personal associates of my son." Harrison's gaze lingered on Nathan just a moment longer, an unspoken assertion of dominance. Then, almost imperceptibly, his focus shifted back to the document, and his voice resumed its steady, neutral cadence. "We now move," he said, "to Article 6, regarding the personal associates of my son, Nathan Thorne." I watched as Kyle, the financial advisor, sat up a little straighter. His shark-like smile was back, fixed in place. He smoothed the lapel of his expensive suit, adjusting his posture, as if already preparing himself for the bonus he was about to receive for managing Nathan's anticipated fortune. Sophia, beside him, finally put her phone down, her eyes alight with greedy anticipation. Harrison continued, "To my son's financial advisor, Mr. Kyle Vance." He pronounced the title with a slight, almost imperceptible emphasis, as though placing it in quotation marks. "I give and bequeath the sum of $5,000. Kyle's smile froze. 5,000. The number hung in the air, shockingly small. It was an insult. Less than the cost of his suit. I watched as his knuckles whitened, his grip tightening on the edge of the table. Nathan, clearly annoyed, shot a glance at him, as though Kyle's disappointment was a personal affront. But Harrison wasn't finished. "I bequeath this sum with the attached legally binding recommendation that he use it to enroll in a course on professional ethics. My own financial records show he has a significant need for a refresher on the topic." The shark-like smile vanished from Kyle's face, replaced by a mask of pale, stunned fury. His head snapped toward Nathan, his eyes wide, as though he couldn't believe what he had just heard. "What is this?" Nathan hissed, his voice vibrating with a low, seething rage. He had just been called a crook in front of a room full of people. And Harrison continued, not missing a beat, his attention now turning to the young woman beside Nathan. "To my son's current companion, Sophia," Harrison read, "I leave her the high-quality imitation handbag she attempted to swap for my authentic Birkin bag in my closet last month." If Kyle had been stunned, Sophia was incinerated. Her perfectly made-up face turned a dark, blotchy red. Her mouth dropped open, and for the first time, she wasn't just insulted, she was exposed. Exposed as a petty thief in front of the man she was clearly trying to trap, in front of the lawyer, and in front of me, the ghost she hadn't even bothered to acknowledge. "The crazy old hag," she shrieked, her voice cracking, her sophistication vanishing in an instant. "She lied." Her voice bounced off the mahogany walls, but she wasn't defending herself. She was trying to silence the problem that had just unraveled her. Her carefully constructed image was crumbling. Nathan, looking furious, wasn't defending her either. He was silencing a problem. His whole image, his precious victory, was falling apart. He had thought he could walk in here, claim his inheritance, and leave unscathed. But this was messy. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't his celebration. "It doesn't matter," he snarled at both of them, his voice dripping with disdain. "It's nothing. It's a joke. Who cares about a bag? Who cares about $5,000? He turned his furious gaze back to Harrison. "Get on with it, Harrison. Stop wasting time with this trash and get to my part." I sat perfectly still, watching the storm unfold around me. And for the first time in 20 years, I felt a connection to Isabella. This was the woman I had married. Not the victim Nathan had painted her to be, but a brilliant, cold, and lethally precise woman. She wasn't just reading a will, she was settling every last score. She was burning down the peripheral parts of Nathan's life, dismantling his entourage piece by piece, isolating him. She was leaving him with nothing but his own greed. She was, in her own way, clearing the table before the main course. Mr. Harrison, completely unbothered by the outburst, simply waited for the shouting to subside. He looked at Nathan, his expression unreadable. "As I have already stated, Mr. Thorne, I will read every word. Now, if I may continue." I sat there, watching the fallout from Isabella's words. Kyle looked like he'd swallowed poison, and Sophia was trembling with pure, unadulterated rage. And in that moment, I thought to myself, this was the Isabella the first remembered. She never forgot a slight. She never let an insult go unanswered. She kept a perfect, detailed ledger of every wrong done to her. And even in death, From inside a leather-bound document, she was still surgically precise. She was still settling her accounts. Harrison let the silence settle for a moment longer. Then, he turned the page. The room tensed. This was it. After clearing away the trash, this was the main event. Article 7, Harrison said, his voice dropping back into that neutral, legal tone. To my son, Nathan Thorne. Nathan leaned forward. His breathing became shallow, and his knuckles turned white from gripping the table. He had forgotten his humiliated companions entirely. All his focus, all his greed, was laser-focused on the lawyer. I give and bequeath the penthouse apartment on Park Avenue. A huge sigh of relief escaped Nathan, his entire body exhaling as if a weight had been lifted. The color returned to his face, and he smirked, shooting a triumphant look first at Kyle, then at me. The penthouse, the crown jewel, was his. But Harrison wasn't finished. He continued, my complete collection of PC Felipe watches. Nathan's smirk widened into a grin. He laughed a short, sharp bark of approval. Yes, yes, now we're talking. He looked at me with gleaming eyes. Hear that, old man? The pecs. All of them. Harrison raised a single finger, halting Nathan's celebration cold. However, he said, and the word lingered in the air like a blade. The watch collection is stored in a secure safe located within the penthouse. The single key to that safe. Harrison paused. He looked down at the document, then lifted his eyes, finding mine across the long expanse of the mahogany table. I have entrusted to his father, Julian Thorne. The silence that followed was absolute. It was so complete that I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Sophia and Kyle, who had been lost in their own humiliation moments before, snapped their heads toward me. Nathan, too, just stared. His face, which had been flushed with victory, went pale. His grin dissolved. What? His voice was quiet, disbelieving. What did you just say? He asked Harrison, his voice rising with frustration. The key, Mr. Thorne, Harrison repeated, his tone unwavering, was entrusted to your father. Nathan slammed his hands on the table and stood, the chair scraping violently behind him. What are you talking about? Is this a joke? A sick joke? He pointed a shaking finger at me. Him. He hasn't seen her in 20 years. He doesn't even know where she lives. He's a nobody. Every eye in the room was on me, and I was just as stunned as Nathan was. I stared at Harrison, my mind spinning. A key. Isabella had given me a key? What did it mean? Was it another one of her games? Another way to twist the knife, even from the grave? I had no key. I had no idea what any of them were talking about. I just sat there, the ghost in the gray suit, suddenly and very uncomfortably the center of everyone's attention. My son was screaming, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. But I wasn't really in that cold mahogany room anymore. As Mr. Harrison shuffled the papers, the sound of the thick, creamy stock sliding against itself seemed to pull me back. Back through 20 years of anger and silence to a different kind of crisis. I wasn't in New York. I was in our old house in Connecticut. It was 2005. The clock read 3 o'clock in the morning, and the house was dark except for the single light in Isabella's home office. I found her there, not crying, but worse, just sitting, staring blankly at a wall of spreadsheets. Her face was pale, completely devoid of expression. She looked broken. Montoya Designs, the company that was her life, her passion, was collapsing around her. Her entire identity was bleeding out. It was on the verge of total catastrophic collapse. Isabella had overextended herself, pouring millions into a luxury resort project in the Caribbean. She had trusted the wrong partners, and the entire deal was built on a shaky foundation of bad permits and shifting sand. Now, everything had fallen apart. The banks were calling in their loans. Investors were threatening to sue her into oblivion. She wasn't just facing bankruptcy, she was facing disgrace. I remember sitting next to her in that dark office, the computer screen casting ghostly shadows on her face. "It's over, Julian," she whispered, her voice hollow. Everything I've built, it's all gone. They're going to take the house. They're going to take everything. She wasn't just afraid of being poor. We'd been poor before, back when we started. No, this was something deeper. She was terrified of being a failure, of being seen as a fool. Her entire world was built on her reputation as a brilliant, infallible businesswoman. And now that reputation was about to be publicly executed. She looked at me then, and her eyes, usually so full of fire and ambition, were empty. "They're talking about criminal negligence," she said, the words barely audible. "They're saying I misled them." I looked at the woman who had been my wife, the mother of my son, the brilliant, infuriating, passionate woman I had loved. And in that moment, I knew she was drowning. And she was about to pull all of us down with her. The memory from 2005 solidified in my mind, sharp and agonizing. Isabella, sitting in her office, utterly broken. She didn't just look broken. She was broken. For a week, our house became a tomb. The phones rang off the hook, calls from angry bankers, betrayed investors. Isabella let them ring, didn't even bother to pick up. She stopped eating. She stopped sleeping. She would just sit there, in her office, staring at the company's financials on the computer screen, watching the numbers bleed into a sea of red. She was paralyzed, drowning in her failure. Then, about a week into this living nightmare, a hand reached out. It didn't come from a bank. It didn't come from a friend or a trusted colleague. It came from an encrypted email routed through a server in the United Arab Emirates. It was an offer for a meeting from a private equity group I had never heard of, based in Dubai. They claimed they had been following Montoya Designs for some time and saw potential. Isabella was too far gone to go, too paranoid even to speak on the phone. She had become a ghost. She begged me to go. I was still her husband. I was still her partner in life, even if I wasn't her partner in business anymore. I was the architect. I understood the construction side of her empire better than anyone else. So I went. I met them in a sterile, soulless conference room at a hotel near JFK Airport. There were 3 of them. They were not bankers. They were young, impeccably dressed in dark, identical suits, and their eyes had the dead coldness of men who had seen too much. They were polite. Too polite. It was the kind of politeness that felt more threatening than a direct insult. They laid out the terms on the table, and it looked like a miracle on the surface. Breathtakingly simple. They would inject $100 million into Montoya Designs, effective immediately. Enough to stabilize the Caribbean project. Enough to pay off the angriest bankers. Enough to silence the lawsuits threatening criminal charges. It was a total rescue. I sat there, stunned. In return, I asked, my voice cautious, "What do you want in return?" The lead negotiator, a man with a faint British accent, slid a thin leather-bound folder across the table. "We are investors, Mr. Thorne. We simply want to invest in future projects. We believe in the Montoya brand. We want to help you build." I brought that folder home. It felt heavy, like it was made of lead. Isabella, desperate for any shred of hope, tore it open. For the first 10 minutes, she was ecstatic, laughing, crying, holding the pages to her chest. "We're saved, Julian. We're saved." But I was reading the fine print. I was an architect. I spent my entire life reading contracts. I spent my life looking at blueprints. And this wasn't a bailout. It was a blueprint for a crime. "Isabella," I said, my voice quiet, cutting through her celebration. "Look at this. The projected costs." I pointed to the addendum, the appendix, the part they hoped we wouldn't read. It detailed the future projects they wanted to fund, a series of luxury high-rises. "Look at the numbers," I said. "They're wrong. They're all wrong. The cost projections, they're inflated by at least 40%. She didn't get it at first. She was too blinded by the $100 million lifeline. "So what?" she said, waving her hand. "They're overpaying. That's their problem, not ours." "No," I said, and a cold dread began to creep up my spine. That's how it works. That's the point. It's not an investment, Isabella. It's a washing machine. The smile on her face flickered. What are you talking about? They give us $100 million in clean capital now, I explained, my voice flat. It saves the company. It makes us whole. In return, we build their future projects. But we don't bill them for the real cost. We bill them for the inflated cost. We bill them for $140 million. We pay their shell companies, their suppliers in the Cayman Islands. That extra $40 million. I paused, looking at her. We take their dirty money and we make it clean. We make it look like legitimate construction payments. I tapped the signature page. They're not investing, Isabella. They're laundering. And they want to use your company, your name, as the detergent. The color drained from her face. She finally, truly understood. She had spent her entire life, her entire soul, building the Monontoya name into a symbol of luxury, quality, and integrity. And now, she was being asked to use that name to wash dirty money. And these men were going to use it to wash their blood money. No, she whispered, her voice shaking with disbelief. I won't do it. Then we declare bankruptcy, I said, stating the simple, brutal truth. It's over. No, she screamed, the word ripping from her throat. She jumped up, pacing the office like a caged animal, her hands twisting in her hair. No, I can't. You don't understand, Julian. She grabbed the front of my shirt, her nails digging into my chest. If we go bankrupt, they'll investigate. They'll do a forensic audit. They'll find the Caribbean mess. They'll say I was negligent. They'll say I committed fraud. Her eyes were wide with terror. It's better than this, Isabella, I pleaded, my voice tight with urgency. This is a criminal enterprise. This is the mob. Or worse. I don't care, she shrieked, her voice breaking. And then she just collapsed. She didn't faint. She simply crumpled onto the expensive Persian rug, her strength gone, leaving her a shell of the woman she had been. She wasn't a CEO anymore. She wasn't an empire builder. She was just a terrified woman trapped in a situation of her own making. Julian, she wept, her voice muffled by the carpet. Please, please, I can't go to jail. I can't go to jail. She looked up at me, her face a ruin of mascara and terror. It was a look I had never seen on her before, a look of absolute, bottomless desperation. I can't lose the company, she whispered, her voice cracking. I can't. It's me. It's everything I am. If I lose Monontoya Designs, I'm nothing. I'm just nothing. Her hands gripped mine, cold as ice. And Nathan, she choked out, struggling to hold herself together. What about Nathan? He's at Yale. He's on top of the world. Do you want him to be the son of a convict? Of a bankrupt failure? He'll be humiliated. He'll hate me. He'll hate us. Please, Julian, there has to be a way. Please. She was hysterical. And she was right, she was trapped. If she refused the deal, she would be ruined and jailed for fraud. If she took it, she would be ruined and jailed for money laundering. She had built her own prison, and now she couldn't see any way out. I stood there, watching her fall apart, the woman who had once been so brilliant, so driven, so impossible. The woman who had built an empire from nothing, yet at times, was so blinded by her own ambition that she couldn't see the cliff edge until she was already over it. I looked at the contracts on the desk. I looked at the blueprints for the fake condos. I was an architect. I knew this world. I knew how these deals were structured. I knew how to hide costs. I knew how to create shell corporations for supplies and labor. I knew how to build the legal firewalls, how to compartmentalize a project so the dirt wouldn't spread. I could see a path, a single, terrible, dangerous path. A way to do what they wanted, but to keep her name, her signature, her public face clean. She begged again. Julian, please, what are we going to do? I looked at her, the woman I had loved, the mother of my son, and I made the choice. The one choice I never thought I'd have to make. The choice that would define the rest of my life. The choice that would save her company and, in doing so, would destroy me. I reached down and pulled her to her feet, holding her by the shoulders. "Stop," I said, my voice calm. It was the unnatural calm of a man who had just accepted his fate. "Stop crying. Go to your room. Go to bed." She looked at me, her eyes wide, confused. "What? You are going to have no part in this," I said, my voice firm. "You will not sign these papers. You will not take these meetings. You will not be on these emails. You will focus on designing. You will focus on saving the public face of the company. You will do what you do best." A tiny, desperate flicker of hope sparked in her tear-filled eyes. "But the deal, the money, the contracts?" I turned from her and walked to the desk. I picked up the heavy leather-bound folder. I looked at the signature page, the one meant for her, the president and CEO of Montoya Designs. "Let me handle this," I said. And so, I became a ghost. While Isabella went back to being the face of Montoya Designs, attending galas, approving fabric swatches, I moved into the shadows. I became the intermediary. I was the one who flew to Zurich, to Dubai, to the Grand Cayman. I was the one who sat in sterile hotel rooms, negotiating payment schedules with men who had no last names. Back in New York, I used my architect's license, my name, my reputation to create a series of shell corporations. Thorn Construction, Thorn Project Management, Thorn Architectural Supply. I built a labyrinth of legal entities, a complex firewall designed for one purpose, to stop the dirt from ever reaching Isabella. The $100 million bailout came through. Montoya Designs was saved. The bankers were paid. The lawsuits vanished. Isabella was celebrated in the financial pages as a genius who had weathered the storm. And then, the second part of the deal began. The laundering. I was the one who signed the inflated construction contracts. I was the one who approved the wire transfers to anonymous accounts. I was the one who personally oversaw the creation of fraudulent invoices, certifying that millions of dollars of Italian marble or German steel had been delivered to sites when, in fact, nothing had arrived but a bank receipt. I was good at it. Terrifyingly good. My architect's mind, so used to building solid, real structures, was just as adept at building hollow, fake ones. For 2 years, I lived a double life. I was a respected architect by day and a high-stakes money launderer by night. I saved her company. I saved her name. I saved her from prison. But you can't move that much dirty money without someone noticing. The FBI didn't come for Isabella. They didn't even know she was involved. They came for me. They had been tracking the Dubai group for years. They saw the money flow into my shell companies. They saw the inflated contracts. They saw the fraudulent invoices. They saw my name, my signature, my architect's seal of approval on documents that were pure fiction. They didn't kick the door in. It was quiet. 2 men in dark suits waiting for me in my office one morning. They laid it all out. They had the wire transfers. They had the surveillance photos of my meetings at JFK. They had me dead to rights. They offered me a deal. "Tell us who you're working for," the lead agent said. "Give us the organization. Give us the people in Dubai. Give us the real beneficiary of this scheme." I looked at the file on the table. My name was on every page. Isabella's was nowhere. I had done my job too well. I had a choice. I could give them Isabella. I could tell them everything, the full story. How she had been terrified. How she had begged me to help her. How I had done it all to save her, to save our son from ruin. They might have been lenient. They might have understood. Or I could take the fall. I thought about Isabella, terrified and broken on the office floor. I thought about Nathan at Yale, with his entire future ahead of him. A future built on his mother's glittering empire. An empire that was now, technically, funded by criminals. So, I made the second choice. The one that sealed my fate. I don't know what you're talking about, I told them. I was overextended. I made some bad deals. I got sloppy with the books. There's no organization. It was just me. I cut corners. I was desperate. I gave them a confession, but not the one they wanted. I confessed to professional negligence, to tax evasion, to falsifying business records. I played the part of a foolish, greedy architect who got in over his head. To protect Isabella from a money laundering conviction, I had to plead guilty to something. So, I did. I didn't go to prison. My lawyers, paid for by Isabella's now stable company, made sure of that. But I lost everything else. I lost my architect's license, revoked permanently. I lost my reputation. My name was dragged through the mud. Julian Thorne, disgraced architect. I was a pariah. And that's when my son, Nathan, twisted the knife. He was 22, home from Yale, and he saw his chance. He went to his mother, not to comfort her, but in anger. He betrayed you, Nathan had screamed at her, a performance I learned about later. He used your company. He embezzled money behind your back. He's a criminal. He humiliated you. He humiliated me. He presented her with an easy narrative, a simple story. In his version, I wasn't the savior. I was the villain. And Isabella, seeing her company saved, seeing her name completely clear, and seeing my name utterly destroyed, she took the easy way out. She chose the story that made her the victim. She chose her son's version of the truth. She filed for divorce. She painted herself as the wronged one, the trusting wife betrayed by her greedy, criminal husband. And she let Nathan, our son, believe every word of it. She let the entire world think the same. Not once did she speak in my defense. She just let me burn. That was the price for saving her. Her voice was calm, but it cut through 20 years of memories like a sharp blade. I blinked, and suddenly, the dark, desperate office in Connecticut vanished, replaced by the cold, polished mahogany of the conference room. My heart raced. The past felt more alive than the present. I looked up, meeting Mr. Harrison's neutral gaze. But the others, everyone else, was staring at me. Kyle, the financial advisor, had that familiar, greedy gleam in his eyes. Sophia, the girlfriend, was looking at me like she was seeing me for the first time, her face flickering with a trace of curiosity in an otherwise vacant expression. And Nathan, my son, was glaring at me with a fierce intensity that sent a chill through me. His face, stormy with suspicion and anger, made his veins bulge. "The key," he spat, his voice low and menacing. "Where is it? What did she give you?" He was convinced this was some twisted plot, a final cruel move from his mother, with me as her unwitting accomplice. He saw betrayal in every shadow. I glanced from his furious face to Mr. Harrison's calm one, looking for answers, but there were none. My mind went blank. The past 20 years had been a quiet life of wood shavings and solitude, a key to a safe full of watches, absurd. A detail from a life that no longer felt like mine. It seemed like a line from someone else's story. I turned back to my son, and in his eyes, I saw it. His entire 160 million inheritance was riding on me now. The ghost he had conjured for his own amusement. I shook my head, not in defiance, but in genuine confusion. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, and it was the truth, pure and simple. The words hung in the air, a plain fact that needed no embellishment. Nathan's stare was one of pure disbelief, quickly morphing into a deep, contemptuous rage. He was processing this new reality, this impossible twist. For a moment, he was like a bull stunned by a cattle prod, but only for a second. He let out a sharp, guttural laugh, a forced sound, meant to signal he was still in control, that this was just a minor, absurd annoyance. "It doesn't matter," he sneered, waving his hand dismissively as if swatting away a fly. "A key? You think I care about a key? You think I'm going to go on some treasure hunt with him?" He laughed again, louder this time. "I'll have a locksmith open that safe before lunch." It was all so irrelevant, a pointless, sentimental game played by a dying woman. He slumped back into his chair, but there was no ease in him. His body was coiled, tight as a spring ready to snap. With trembling fingers, manicured and sharp, he pointed at Mr. Harrison. "Enough of these games," he snapped, punctuating each word with a trembling rage. "Enough of the servants, enough of the butterflies, enough of the keys. Get to the point, Harrison. The main event, the assets, the 160 million. Read the part where it all comes to me. Read it now." Mr. Harrison looked over the top of his reading glasses, unmoved. There was no fear in his gaze, no irritation. He simply let Nathan's command hang in the air, allowing its arrogance to suffocate in the thick silence. Then, with that maddening calmness, he adjusted his glasses, took a deliberate sip of water from a crystal glass, and turned the page. The sound of the paper was like thunder in the quiet room, a loud, heavy crack, like a judge turning to the final page of a verdict. He was savoring this. He was following Isabella's script to the letter. "Of course," Mr. Harrison said, his voice a steady monotone. "We will now proceed to Article 8, the disposition of the primary estate. The residue of all property, real and personal, wherever situated." This was it. The air in the room thickened, almost suffocating. Nathan was leaning so far forward. He was almost spilling out of his chair, every muscle in his body straining with greed. Even Kyle and Sophia, despite their public shame, were hanging on every word, watching with desperate, hungry attention. This moment, they all knew, would redeem them. Harrison read from the page, detailing the remaining liquid assets, stocks, bonds, properties, and the controlling interest in Montoya Designs LLC. He paused. Not by mistake, but deliberately. He looked down at the page, as though rereading a complex, unexpected clause. He was stretching this out, drawing it out. A showman at work. "Come on," Nathan hissed under his breath, his voice low and frantic. Harrison cleared his throat, his tone unflinching. "I decree the following. First, to my ex-husband, Julian Thorne." My head snapped up. Me. What was this? A strangled gasp came from Nathan. His face, pale with anticipation, went rigid. His eyes narrowed into slits of pure hatred, fixed on me with laser intensity. He wasn't breathing now. He was just waiting. His jaw clenched and unclenched, his teeth grinding, every muscle wound tight. What was this? Was this some final cruelty from Isabella? Was she going to give me some token, some small insulting sum, just a few thousand, before giving Nathan the rest? Was this her way of rubbing his nose in it one last time? Harrison continued, his voice unwavering, betraying not the slightest hint of the drama he was orchestrating. "To my ex-husband, Julian Thorne, I give and bequeath the sum of $15. $15. The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of their absurdity. It wasn't just an insult. It was a public execution. A joke, yes, but a petty, cruel, and profoundly childish joke. But Harrison wasn't done yet. He read the final part of the clause, the one that twisted the knife and drove it deeper. $15. U.S. currency, to be paid in cash. This is to cover the cost of the bus ride back to wherever it is he came from. A trip my son Nathan will surely be kind enough to suggest for him. It started as a snort, a disbelieving, choked sound. But then the dam of Nathan's self-control didn't just crack, it disintegrated. A laugh, no, a bellow, an enormous, roaring laugh erupted from him. It wasn't a sound of humor, it was the sound of raw, unfiltered triumph. It was a triumphant, malicious, joy-soaked laugh so intense it made the air in the room feel sick. He shot up from his chair, trembling with the power of his laughter. His fingers shook as he pointed at me. His face turned a blotchy, furious crimson. Tears of vindictive joy streamed down his cheeks. $15, he howled, the words crashing against the walls. $15. He doubled over, slapping his hand against the priceless mahogany table, as if the absurdity of it was just too much. Oh my God, $15. Kyle, who had been sitting in stunned silence, his humiliation heavy in the air, now seemed to catch the shift. He saw an opening, his path back into his patron's good graces. A sickly smile slowly spread across his face. Incredible, Nathan. Just incredible. Sophia, catching on, let out a shrill, sycophantic laugh. $15 for a bus ride? She giggled, high-pitched and mocking. Oh, Nathan, that's hilarious. Isn't it? Nathan howled, straightening up and wiping a tear from his eye. He was performing now, his audience back at full attention. He puffed his chest out, basking in the moment. He glanced at Kyle and Sophia, his companions in his gleeful victory. She always had a wicked sense of humor, he said, as if savoring the taste of the moment. Always. In his mind, the game was over. The insults to his friends? Just appetizers. The confusion with the key? A meaningless distraction. This was the punchline. The moment he'd been waiting for. He had won. Publicly, legally, financially, he was the victor. And I had been publicly, legally, financially declared nothing. Less than nothing. A $15 joke. His laughter finally subsided into a low, smug chuckle. He straightened the cuffs of his Tom Ford suit, an effortless gesture, an assertion of restored control. He was the king again. He turned his gaze on me, and just like that, the humor vanished. What replaced it was a cold, reptilian satisfaction. A dark, venomous smile curled on his lips. Well, he said, his voice dripping with false pity, that's that, I suppose. He walked around the table, a predator circling its kill, until he stopped just a few feet away from me. His eyes scanned me, filled with such profound disgust it was almost physical. It's over, old man, he said, his words like poison. You heard her. $15. He reached into his pocket, the one of his $10,000 suit, and pulled out a sleek alligator skin wallet. With slow, deliberate movements, he made a show of opening it, his every action dripping with manufactured theatrics. You know what? He sneered, his voice low and dripping with false camaraderie. $15 is a little insulting, don't you think? He pulled out a crisp $20 bill and flicked it onto the table in front of me. The bill skittered across the polished wood, coming to a stop right in front of my hands. There, he said. $20. Don't say I never gave you anything. He stared at me, daring me to react, to yell, to cry, to reach for the money. I did none of those things. I just sat there, unmoving. My eyes lingered on the $20 bill, then shifted to his smug, victorious face, and I waited. I didn't feel humiliated. I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel sadness. There was only a deep, profound sense of anticipation. Because I knew Isabella. And I was watching Mr. Harrison. Mr. Harrison hadn't moved. He was sitting at the head of the table, his face a perfect neutral mask, his hands resting on the document. He wasn't just letting the performance play out, he was savoring it. This wasn't the end. No, this was the intermission. My stillness, my complete lack of reaction, infuriated Nathan more than any outburst could have. His smile faltered for a moment, and he leaned forward, his voice dripping with venom. What's the matter, old man? He sneered. Speechless? Cat got your tongue. He scoffed, throwing his hands up in exaggerated indifference. Whatever. It's done. It's all mine. Finally, you can get the hell out of here now. Go back to your sawdust shed or whatever hole you crawled out of. And don't forget your bus money. With that, he turned his back on me, his final, dismissive act. He walked back to his chair, clapping Kyle on the shoulder with exaggerated camaraderie. Right, per se, Nathan said, almost gleeful. We have a lot of champagne to drink. He grabbed his suit jacket, slipping it on, ready to leave. Ready to start his new life. His smile was wide, victorious. He was beaming, clapping Kyle on the back so hard it almost seemed like a punch. Right, he boomed, his voice loud and triumphant. Per se. I'm going to buy the entire champagne list. Nathan then turned toward the door, still basking in his apparent victory. Harrison, he called over his shoulder, not even sparing the lawyer a glance. "Just have your girl send the papers to my office for me to sign. I'm done here." It was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment he thought would mark his coronation. He turned to leave, the king departing his own coronation, smug and certain of his victory. But then, the voice cut through the air like a sheet of ice. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp and unyielding. It had a core of absolute steel. It stopped everyone. It stopped Nathan dead in his tracks. His jacket halfway on, one foot already turned toward the door, he turned back, his face, a mask of triumph, slowly hardening into something darker. "What?" he said, the smile on his face faltering. Mr. Harrison was still seated, unmoving. He hadn't shifted an inch. He was looking at Nathan now, and his expression was no longer neutral. It was cold, devoid of any trace of politeness. "Please, sit down." And just like that, the smile on Nathan's face didn't just fade, it disappeared completely. It was as if the expression had been scrubbed away by a solvent. The color drained from Nathan's face, leaving behind the blotchy red patches from his earlier laughter, now looking like burns on his skin. "What did you say?" he whispered, his voice suddenly small, fragile. "Harrow, I said," Mr. Harrison repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "Sit down. I have not finished reading." "Finished?" Nathan's voice cracked, disbelieving. "What are you talking about?" "You read it. $15. The joke. It's over. You're done." But Mr. Harrison, with the deliberate slowness of a man about to reveal the final piece of a game, reached down to his briefcase resting on the floor beside him. He didn't touch the leather-bound will already on the table. Instead, he pulled out a second, thinner folder. It was simple manila, but sealed with a thick red wax, making it look important, almost ominous. "This," Mr. Harrison said, tapping the leather binder on the table, "is the conclusion of the original last will and testament." He placed the new folder on the table. "This," he continued, his voice dropping to a controlled, careful tone, "is a legally binding addendum." He looked directly at Nathan, his gaze unflinching. "It was signed, witnessed, and notarized 3 weeks ago, 1 week before your mother's stroke." He paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. Then he added, "And its primary clause," his eyes flicking briefly to me, "explicitly states that it supersedes and replaces all previous articles pertaining to the disposition of the primary estate." The words hit like a punch, each one deeper than the last. He lost his license. He lost his reputation. He lost his entire career. He did it to save me. To save the company that you now so arrogantly claim as your own. Harrison's voice dropped, and the weight of it hung in the room like a death sentence. "And what did I do? What did I do as my reward for this sacrifice?" He didn't need to read anymore. We all knew what was coming. "I listened to you," Harrison continued, the words thick with Isabella's regret. "I listened to your poison. You told me he was a criminal. You told me he had humiliated us, and I, in my shame and cowardice, agreed. I let that be the story. I divorced him. I abandoned him. I let you, our son, treat him like trash because I was terrified that if you ever knew the truth, you would look at me with the same contempt you had for him." Nathan was trembling, but not from rage. He was frozen. "I was a coward, Nathan, and I let you become this. This greedy, arrogant, empty shell of a man who mocks the very person who sacrificed everything so you could have this life." The $160 million fortune that Nathan had been so eager to claim, the one that had been his obsession. Harrison's voice went even lower. "It exists for one reason, and one reason only. It exists because your father, Julian Thorne, saved it." The silence that followed was so thick it felt suffocating. The air in the room was sucked out, leaving only the sound of Harrison's voice, reading Isabella's final words, rewriting 20 years of Nathan's life in real time. Harrison was no longer just a lawyer. He was the vessel for a confession that had been locked away for far too long. Nathan was completely still. His body was rigid, like a statue. He wasn't shaking his head anymore, wasn't covering his ears. He was staring at the polished empty surface of the table. his face a mask of waxy, corpse-like white. He looked like a man who had just been told the world was ending, and he was the only one who hadn't known. Harrison continued, his voice steady, unwavering, relentless. "Your father," he read, "is not a criminal. He is not a failure. He is a hero. The kind of man who makes a sacrifice so deep, so complete, that people like you and me can't even comprehend it. He burned his own life to the ground to keep us warm. And I let you treat him like garbage. I encouraged you to treat him like garbage. I used your contempt for him as a shield to hide my own shame." Every word from Harrison felt like it was being carved into the very fabric of the room. "Every time you mocked him," he continued, his voice never wavering, "every time you called him a washed-up old man, it was one more stone on the wall I built to protect myself from the truth. The truth," Isabella's words, struck like a bolt of lightning. "I was the weak one, the failure, the one who had betrayed this family." My hands were shaking. I clasped them together on the table, knuckles white, gripping so tightly I thought they might crack. The hot sting of tears welled up behind my eyes, something I hadn't felt in decades. It wasn't sadness. It was something worse. Validation. A terrible, painful validation, 20 years too late. Harrison's voice was relentless, a hammer that drove the truth deeper with each passing word. "This $160 million fortune," he read, "this empire you've been waiting to inherit like a spoiled prince, it does not exist because of you. It does not even exist because of me. It exists entirely because of Julian Thorne." The words sliced through the air. "You, Nathan," Harrison continued, his voice now a direct, brutal assault, "have never worked a real day in your life. You have never built anything. You have never sacrificed anything. You are just a parasite, a creature of appetite. You have done nothing but spend money that you didn't earn, all while sitting in judgment of the one man who actually earned it for you. You are a consumer living off the scraps of his honor." I saw the weight of the words land, each one heavier than the last. Nathan made a small, broken noise, something animalistic. It came from deep within his chest, a sound that seemed to echo in the hollow space around us. "No," he whispered, his voice weak, defeated. "No, she didn't. She loved me." But he wasn't defiant anymore. He wasn't angry. He was just hollow. The entire narrative he had built his life on, the brilliant, infallible mother, the criminal, worthless father, his own status as the rightful heir, had been completely, irrevocably incinerated in the span of 5 minutes. Nathan slowly, mechanically slumped back in his chair. He didn't just sit. He crumpled. His $10,000 suit, his armor of arrogance, suddenly seemed 2 sizes too big for him. He looked like a child, lost, broken, and terrified. "No," he whispered again, his voice cracking, it's a lie. She wouldn't." Harrison looked up from the page, his eyes as cold as ice. "She did, Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice carrying the finality of truth. "And she had it all notarized." He turned the page. And now, the conclusion. The room was no longer just a conference room. It had transformed into a courtroom, into a confessional, into a tomb. Now, it was the stage for the final act. Nathan, a hollow shell, slumped in his expensive suit, stared at the table, but I knew he wasn't seeing the polished wood. He was seeing the 20-year-long lie of his life, now exposed in the harsh, fluorescent light. Kyle and Sophia were frozen. Their petty ambitions, once so important to them, were now rendered irrelevant. They were collateral damage in a war they had never even known was being fought. Mr. Harrison's voice, which had carried the weight of Isabella's confession, shifted now. It became harder, more formal. This was the judgment. The final, legal, binding word. He turned the last page of the addendum. "Your mother's letter," Mr. Harrison said, his gaze fixed directly on Nathan, "serves as the legal and moral preamble to this, the final binding article of her last will and testament. It supersedes all that came before it. This is Article 8, the final disposition." He cleared his throat and began to read. "Therefore," he continued, his voice calm but unwavering, having stated the unvarnished truth, and in an effort to correct, Insofar as money is able, a betrayal that can never be undone. He paused, his eyes scanning the room to make sure he had the undivided attention of every person present. He did. The silence was so absolute that I could hear the tiny mechanical whir of the clock on the wall. I hereby decree, as my final wish and binding testament, he read on, all of my property, real and personal, wherever situated, all of my stocks, bonds, and liquid assets, my art collection, my private holdings, and most importantly, my entire unencumbered 100% controlling interest in Montoya Designs LLC and all its subsidiaries, an estate with a current estimated value of $160 million. He listed the assets with the weight of a judge reading a death sentence. It wasn't a prize. It was a burden. An empire. An impossible weight. Nathan didn't move. He didn't breathe. He was a statue, his skin the color of ash, frozen in place. All of this, Harrison read, I give, devise, and bequeath. He paused again. His eyes moved across the room, but not to Nathan. Not to Kyle or Sophia. His eyes found mine. In that 1 second of silence, it felt like my entire life was suspended, teetering on the edge of an impossible precipice. My workshop. My sawdust. My quiet, solitary peace. I wasn't thinking about money. I wasn't thinking about victory. I was thinking, what has she done? What final, terrible, complicated game was this? I was still reeling from the confession, from the validation that had been stolen from me for 2 decades. The money, the empire, it was a complication I couldn't even process. It was a different language, one I didn't speak anymore. Mr. Harrison looked back down at the page. I give, devise, and bequeath to my ex-husband, Julian Thorne. The words didn't land. They just hung there, suspended in the air like a question no one could answer. Julian Thorne. Me. The man in the 20-year-old suit. The man who had been summoned here for a public execution. I heard a sound, small, wet, broken. It was Nathan. But I couldn't look at him. I couldn't move. It felt as though the roof of the building had been ripped off, and the entire crushing weight of the New York City sky was pressing down on my shoulders. $160 million. Montoya Designs. It wasn't a gift. It was a life sentence. A chain. Her way of pulling me back from the quiet obscurity I had fought so hard to embrace, back into the world of glass and steel, contracts and lies, a world I had run from. I could feel my heart pounding, each beat a slow, heavy drum in my chest. Thump, thump, thump. Mr. Harrison, bless him, didn't let the moment hang. He didn't give anyone a chance to react. He knew that the next words were the most important. He understood that the money was just a tool. The real reason, the payload, was what mattered. He continued reading, his voice firm, projecting into the stunned dead silence that filled the room. I leave this, he read, not as a gift, but as a payment, as a long overdue and wholly inadequate compensation for the career I allowed to be destroyed, for the honor I allowed to be stolen, and for the family I, in my cowardice, allowed to be broken. And that's when it hit me. It wasn't about the money. It had never been about the money. It was about the reason. It was her final, written, legally binding confession. It was her apology. It was her way of reaching out from beyond the grave, handing me back my name, handing me back my honor. She wasn't just giving me her company. She was telling the world it should have been mine all along, that I was the one who had saved it. I looked down at my hands, my rough, calloused carpenter's hands, resting on the polished, perfect wood of the table. The hands of a man who built things. And now, those hands were holding the weight of an empire I had never wanted. A small sound broke through the silence. A whimper. It came from across the table. It was Nathan. He wasn't a monster anymore. He wasn't a king. He was just a boy. A 42-year-old boy whose entire life had just been revealed as a lie his mother had told him, and a lie his father had paid for. Kyle and Sophia, once so eager, were already ghosts. Their faces were blank, their minds unable to process this new reality. They had hitched their wagons to a falling star, and now they were just irrelevant. Collateral damage. I looked at Mr. Harrison. He was watching me, waiting, his expression unreadable. $160 million. The company. The penthouse. The watches. Isabella, my brilliant, impossible, destructive wife. Even in death, she had to have the last word. She had to control the entire narrative. She had exonerated me. She had made me whole. But in doing so, she had chained me to her legacy forever. She had given me everything, and in a way, she had taken everything all over again. My simple life was over. My son, Nathan, was a ruin. A building that had been imploded. He sat there, his mouth half open, eyes blank and unfocused, still trying to process the fact that the entire $160 million universe he thought he was inheriting had just vanished. Vanished. And it had been handed to me, the man he despised more than anyone on earth. He was breathing in short, shallow gasps, like a drowning man. Kyle and Sophia were completely adrift. Their golden goose hadn't just stopped laying eggs. It had exploded. I could see the panic in Kyle's eyes, the gears of his rat-like brain spinning furiously, searching for a new angle, a new con, but coming up with nothing. He was trying to calculate his next move, but the truth was too heavy for him to carry. Sophia, on the other hand, was completely still. Her face, a mask of makeup, looked like a porcelain shell, fragile and cracked under the weight of what she was witnessing. Harrison, the executor of this devastating will, was not done. He still held the addendum, his hands steady as ever, as he looked around the room. "One last piece of business," he said. His voice, as unforgiving as a judge's gavel, cut through the stillness. "We come to the final bequest." He paused, his gaze shifting to my son. "And for my son, Nathan Thorne." At the sound of his name, there was a flicker. A tiny, pathetic spark in Nathan's dead eyes. It wasn't hope, not by any means. It was more primal than that. It was the desperate animal instinct not to be left with absolutely nothing. He slowly, painfully raised his head, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow, fixed on Harrison. He was waiting. For what? $1 million. A trust fund? An allowance? Some small scrap from the table he had thought had been set for him. Mr. Harrison looked at him, and there was no pity in his gaze. No emotion at all. Just the final, cold execution of his duty. "For my son Nathan," he read, "who has already received a lifetime's worth of fortune, both in the money he spent so freely and in the sacrifices he never acknowledged, I leave him only one thing." Harrison paused. His eyes flicked down to the paper, then back up to Nathan. "I leave him precisely what he so thoughtfully and publicly offered to his father." I felt my breath catch. "No." Nathan's confused, broken gaze shifted from Harrison to me, then back to the lawyer. He didn't understand. He couldn't make the connection. His mind was too shattered to process the weight of what was happening. I don't." "What?" His voice cracked as the truth started to settle in, but it was too late. Mr. Harrison didn't respond. Instead, with slow, deliberate motion, he reached to the side of his desk, opened a single drawer, and took out one item. He held it up briefly, then placed it on the polished mahogany table. It was a check. A single, bank-certified cashier's check. "Mr. Harrison, on behalf of the estate," he said, his voice still flat, "was authorized to prepare this in accordance with your mother's wishes." He slid the check across the table, the faint sound of its movement cutting through the silence. It came to a stop directly in front of Nathan. $15, Harrison said, his voice offering nothing but cold finality. "Final. Your inheritance, Mr. Thorne, as your mother specified for your bus fare." Kyle, the shark, the financial advisor, said nothing. Not a sound. He simply stood up quietly, smoothly, and pushed his chair in. He didn't look at Nathan. He didn't look at me. He didn't even seem to hesitate. He gathered his briefcase and walked out of the conference room, his departure as silent as his presence. Sophia, however, was not silent. She looked at the check, her face draining of any color. The weight of the moment seemed to fall on her, the reality of what had just transpired settling like a stone in her stomach. She looked at Nathan's broken, pathetic face, Her expression, once filled with shock, twisted into something else entirely. It was pure, unadulterated disgust. The revulsion of a predator for a mate who had suddenly become weak. The man she had attached herself to, the source of the Birkin bags and the Park Avenue life, was now nothing. He was a $15 man. "You," she hissed, her voice low, venom dripping from every word. "You're pathetic." Without another word, she stood up, grabbed her own expensive purse, the real one, and without a single glance back, she walked out of the room. The click-clack of her high heels on the marble floor outside echoed through the silence, the only sound left in the room. And then there were three. The check. The $15 check. It sat there on the polished wood, a brutal final monument to my son's arrogance. Nathan stared at it, his breath shallow and gasping. Then, for a full 5 seconds, he went completely motionless. He was a statue of ruin. I could see the tiny muscles in his cheek twitching, his only sign of life. And then he exploded. It wasn't a word. It was a scream, a primal, guttural roar of pure, undiluted rage that felt like a physical blow. It was the sound of a man who had not just lost everything, but who had just realized, in one horrifying instant, that he was nothing. "No." His arms flew out, sweeping the table with the force of a storm. Glasses, notepads, the heavy water carafe, all went flying. The crystal shattered against the mahogany wall, and the sharp crack of it echoed in the room. "I'll sue you!" he shrieked, his voice cracking, spittle flying from his lips. He wasn't talking to Harrison. He was screaming at the universe, at his dead mother. "I'll sue all of you. She was crazy. She was senile. I'll prove it. I'll burn it all to the ground." He spun around, his movements jerky, uncoordinated. His eyes were wild and bloodshot, a man consumed by rage and humiliation. And then his gaze landed on me. All of his anger, all of his pain, focused into one single burning point of hatred. "You," he bellowed. "This was you. You did this. You got to her. You manipulated her. You thief." And with that, he lunged. He didn't just walk. He launched himself across the room, his chair crashing to the floor behind him. He wasn't a businessman anymore. He was an animal, blind with fury. His hands were curled into claws, and he was coming straight for my throat. I didn't even have time to stand. I braced myself, waiting for the impact. But Harrison was faster. His hand, which had been resting calmly on the desk, moved with lightning speed to a small black intercom button. He pressed it once. Before Nathan could even get halfway around the massive table, the conference room doors burst open. Not one, but 2 security guards filled the doorway. These weren't the average security types. These were men built like refrigerators, professionals in dark suits with earpieces. The kind of men who protect billionaires and presidents. They didn't say a word. They didn't need to. Nathan stopped dead in his tracks, his chest heaving with the force of his fury. He was caught, trapped between the weight of his own rage and the reality of the men who had just entered his world. Nathan, blinded by his own rage, didn't even see them until they had him. One guard grabbed his left arm, the other grabbed his right. They spun him around, his $1,000 suit jacket tearing at the seams, and pinned his arms behind his back with brutal, practiced efficiency. "Get your hands off me!" Nathan screamed, his voice a pathetic mix of fury and panic. He struggled, thrashing against their grip, but it was like a fly struggling against steel. Mr. Harrison stood up slowly. He took in the wreckage of his conference room, his perfectly ordered world now in chaos. He looked at the struggling, weeping, screaming man held captive by his security. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Remove him," Harrison said, his voice flat and cold. "You can't do this to me." Nathan shrieked as they began dragging him backward out of the room. "I am Nathan Thorne. I own this building. I'll have your jobs. I'll—" "And Mr. Thorne," Harrison added, his voice cutting through the tantrum like a blade. Nathan froze, his head twisting around, his eyes still wild. Harrison pointed to the small white check still sitting innocently on the table. Don't forget your inheritance. That was it. That broke him. The last shred of his sanity snapped. He began to curse Harrison, curse his mother, but most of all, he cursed me. I'll kill you, old man. Do you hear me? I'll kill you. His voice was still shrill, still laced with unhinged rage as they dragged him out into the hallway and toward the elevators. His expensive shoes scuffed pathetically on the marble floor, his last defiant screams echoing down the corridor. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind him, and he was gone. The silence that rushed in to fill the vacuum of Nathan's rage was profound. It was a thick, heavy quiet, broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the distant, muffled wail of a siren far below, on the streets of the city. The adrenaline that had been holding me upright, the shock of the last hour, of everything, drained away all at once. I felt tired. So tired, in a way that went bone deep. 20 years of exhaustion seemed to land on me like a weight I had been carrying for too long. I slumped back in my chair, the old wool of my suit suddenly feeling heavy, like armor that had served its purpose and now was too much to bear. There were only two of us left now. Me, the man who now owned everything, and Mr. Harrison, the man who had delivered the verdict. I looked at the chaos, overturned chairs, shattered glass, the $20 bill Nathan had thrown at me still sitting on the table beside the $15 check. The symbols of everything Nathan had lost, everything I had gained. I looked at Harrison. He was calmly straightening the documents, his face once again a neutral mask, as if a Category 5 hurricane hadn't just torn through his office. Only one question remained. The one loose thread. The key, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The watches. Why did she do that? Why involve me in that? It was cruel. Mr. Harrison stopped shuffling the papers. He looked at me, his expression still unreadable. The moment hung in the air between us, waiting for an answer that had been hidden for so long. He looked up at me, and for the first time that day, a genuine human smile touched the corners of his mouth. It was small, sad, and knowing, like a quiet acknowledgment of the pain that had unfolded. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice softening, "that was your wife's final test for her son." "A test?" I asked, the weight of the words sinking in. "He failed spectacularly." Mr. Harrison nodded slightly, his expression unwavering. "She wanted to see if he would, even for a moment, be willing to humble himself and ask you for something. To see if there was any part of him left that could be redeemed." He shook his head. "He didn't. And it was a message for you." He reached into his breast pocket, the same one from which he had taken his glasses, and pulled out something small. It wasn't the thick leather binder or the sealed addendum. It was a key. A single, old-fashioned brass key, the kind you might use to open a door. He slid it across the table. The small metallic tink as it stopped near my hand was the only sound. "That," he said, "is the key she left for you. It was never about the watches. That part was just theater, a way to set the stage." I stared at the small, simple object, trying to understand. "Then, what is this for?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It's the key to the penthouse," Harrison said. "But the safe inside, the one she mentioned, doesn't contain any watches. Nathan will have it drilled open, and he will find nothing but empty velvet boxes. Another final joke, I suppose." "So what's in it?" I asked, feeling the weight of the moment pressing on me. "What is this key really for?" Harrison leaned forward, his voice lowering, as though he were about to reveal the final truth. "There is another safe, Mr. Thorne," he said. "A wall safe hidden behind a painting in her private study. This is the key to that safe." He paused, letting the weight of the next words land. "In it is the original evidence. Everything. The complete unredacted 2005 file, all the original wire transfers, all the shell company documents you signed, and most importantly, all the emails and letters she sent you, begging you to do it." My heart stopped. I could barely breathe as Harrison continued, his voice soft and almost reverent. "She kept it all," he said quietly. "She kept the entire unvarnished truth locked away for 20 years. The confession she wrote, It's all supported by this. She wanted you to be the one to find it. She wanted you to be the one to decide whether to make it public or not. He nodded at the key in front of me. The money, that was her apology. But this, he said, was her giving you back your name. I reached out, my rough, calloused fingers closing around the small, cool piece of brass. The weight of it felt different, unlike the $160 million that now hung over my shoulders. The money was a burden, a new prison. But this key, this was freedom. What would you have done with the key and that $160 million burden? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.